Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the #1 home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome back to the show. This is Mike Walters, your host of the Ducks and Pucks podcast. We're going to be doing podcasts all summer long. On this one, we've got Eddie along with me, and also one of our writers, Thomas, who covers a lot of the prospects for the Ducks. First off, the big news, Eddie, Bruce Boudreau, it looks like he's going to return, according to ESPN.
Yeah, Pierre LeBrun came out and put out a tweet that he said that Boudreau's pretty much going to return, and it's not confirmed by the Ducks yet, but I don't think anybody expected him to be fired after he after the season that he had and make it to Game 7 of Round 3. I don't think anybody really expected him to be gone. I know a lot of people were calling for his head after Game 7, but I think people were just disappointed, obviously, at the loss. But I don't think anybody's too surprised that he's going to be coming back next season.
And Thomas, what are your thoughts on Bruce coming back? You like it? Not surprised or anything else?
I like it. I think he's a great coach who just got beaten Game 7, and that happens, unfortunately, to him a lot. But I still think he's the best coach for the team right now. I mean, you fire him, who do you replace him with? Who's out there who could do as good a job as he's done the last 3 seasons?
Yeah, I agree with you, Thomas, and that's kind of what Alex wrote about in his article about Boudreau when we sent it out. When Pierre announced it on his blog that he was coming back, that was the same stance, and I think we're all in agreement. I mean, he's been the best regular season coach for the last 4 or 5 years up there in the tops, and of course Game 7s have come to get him, but I think the Ducks are still going to be good with him going down the road next season and hopefully after that, Eddie.
Yeah, and really, who else do you sign if you fire him? Babcock's already gone to the Leafs, and McClellan's gone to San Jose, and Beleskey's gone. And really, though, are those guys upgrades? Everybody likes the system that Boudreau plays, and barring the losses in Game 7, regular season's been great. 3 division championships in a row. Finishing top in the West twice. What more can you ask for other than a cup? And we still have a few years to go for it. And he's got to be the guy that has the chance to go for it.
Yeah, and speaking about going for it, we got a couple UFAs coming up here in the summer, and plenty of RFAs coming down the road as well. We've got to figure out what we're going to do down this next couple seasons. Looking at the UFAs of Beauchemin and Beleskey. What do you think, Thomas, is the strategy for the Ducks? Do you think we try to sign both? I mean, I know Murray mentioned that, but it's going to be kind of difficult.
I mean, he said he wants both, but I just don't know if he can. It comes down to money and term. The Ducks have a lot of cap space right now, but next season they've got so many players who are going to need raises that it comes down to how much are Beleskey and Francois, are they worth more than the kids next summer?
And what do you think? I mean, if you had to pick one, would you rather the Ducks go with, Beauchemin, or do you think the Ducks should try to get Beleskey if you had to choose just one?
If I had to choose, I personally go Beauchemin simply because I think the Ducks could probably get him on a cheaper deal. I think Beleskey's going to want $4 or $5 million for 4 or 5 years, and I'm just not sure he's worth that much.
Yeah, and it may be difficult to try and pan out that kind of a deal. What do you think, Eddie, if it came down to Beauchemin or Beleskey, which one would the Ducks try to go after, or which one do you think they should go after?
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think Beauchemin brings more to the team. He's a leader. I like the defensive style he brings to the game as well. Obviously he had a great offensive season for him this year too, but I think he brings more to the team at a better price as well. Beleskey's going to want to raise for the season that he had in the playoffs, and some team out there is going to pay him ridiculous money, and I don't think it's worth it to match it, especially like Thomas said, with the RFAs we have to sign in 2016, and Kessler's a UFA as well. So I think it's better to sign Beauchemin on a cheap for a couple of years and let Beleskey walk if he wants too much money.
And another part of that equation too is if we do take Beauchemin and re-sign him to another couple of years, then what's going to happen with Wisniewski? That rumor came out this week that maybe Wisniewski gets traded. So, do you think that would be an option, maybe, Thomas, that the Ducks try to make some kind of trade in the summer, or do you think that they just go with the flow and try to re-sign or shore up some of these RFA deals as well?
I think they'd keep Wisniewski through the summer simply because since he didn't play at all in the playoffs. If he'd gotten playing time in a great and his trade value was higher, then sure. But because he doesn't play, I think it's better to go into the season carrying 7 defensemen, or even try and trade Stoner this summer because his trade value is going to be very high after his strong playoff performance.
And what do you think, Eddie? Do you think the Ducks keep all the defensemen they have if they re-sign Beauchemin, or do you think we try to trade one of them to another team?
Yeah, we talked about this last week in the podcast as well, that Wisniewski's trade value won't be that high after not playing in the playoffs, and it'd almost be better to take all of them into the season and evaluate your play near the trade deadline than to panic right now and make a trade. There's nothing we really have to move. Wisniewski still has, I believe his contract expires in 2017, and in that last year his cap drops down to $3 million. So if anything, he becomes more valuable in that last year, even though he's a UFA. I think you go into the season with 7 guys, and like Thomas said, you maybe look to trade Stoner if you're going to trade anybody now, and maybe evaluate it better at the trade deadline.
Yeah, I think both of you are right. I think that's the best strategy now is trying to keep all of them, especially if we keep Beauchemin, and then go down the stretch and figure out what happens, in the middle of the season if we trade somebody or coming up to the trade deadline. Because having 7 defensemen, in the NHL, you can never have too many defensemen. Looking at the Ducks also, besides Beauchemin and Beleskey, who are the other RFAs that we have, Thomas, that the Ducks should look at trying to shore up their contracts in the summer?
So this year, thankfully, the Ducks don't have very many restricted free agents. It's on the roster, Chris Wagner, Emerson Etem, and Jakob Silfverberg. And thankfully, that's all they have, although there are a few prospects like Max Freeberg, Igor Bobkov, John Kurtz, Louis LeBlanc, who are also restricted free agents, but they should all get cheap 1 or 2 year deals, so I'm not too worried about them.
As far as Wagner, Etem, and Silfverberg, what would be your priority? Would you have one, higher than another? Obviously Silfverberg did really, really well in the playoffs on the second line. Wagner stepped up and did, well. Etem played and he had moments of brilliance, but not, as consistent. Is there any one of those 3 that, you prefer, or do you think the Ducks should just try to, get all 3 signed to extensions?
I think there's no question. Silfverberg is the priority. But exactly how much term and money he's going to get is the question. Even Wagner should be a lot simpler. It'll probably be like Smith Pelly and Botman got last summer, a cheap 1 or 2 year deal, just to see how they're going to keep moving forward. And then when that next contract is up, then see if they're going to be with the team long term. But at this point, Silfverberg, he got a 1 year deal last summer. He's proved he belongs on the team and will be here for a long time. So I think he's going to get a longer extension. I just am not sure how long and how long that could take to hash out.
What do you think, Eddie? You think this the same as Thomas? You think Silfverberg is probably going to get the longer extension out of the 3?
Yeah, I think so. I would see Etem maybe getting one last chance with a 1 year or possibly a 2 year, and Wagner gets a little bit of a re-up where he's in the minors coming up and down the lineup again like he did this season. But obviously the big one is Silfverberg, and if you deal him a 2 year bridge deal, then you got to take into account the Beleskey signings again and Beauchemin, and looking farther down the road than 2016, because after you make those signings, then you got to look to 2017 where Silfverberg becomes a UFA and you have to re-sign him probably for more money if he continues to produce. So a lot of things that Murray has to take into account when he's signing his UFAs and thinking about the term for Silfverberg. But I definitely agree he's the priority, and I think it all comes down to the term and money that he's going to get.
And with that, so if we re-sign Silfverberg, Wagner, and Etem, and then Beleskey goes off to another team or whatever does happen, if that does happen, what do you think, Thomas, as far as the forwards go? Would there be anybody that you would bring up to play, maybe Richie or anybody else to fill in, the spot up there? Or do you think the Ducks try to go out and get another winger out there?
And I was looking at the free agent list a little while ago, and there's not a lot of names that jump out at me as being great players. Free agency almost always have to just overpay severely, and in that case, I would worry about re-signing our core young players in the coming years. So unless the free agent can be had on the cheap, I would stay away from most of them. I'd actually be willing to bring back Fleischmann on a short 1 year deal if he takes a $1 or $2 million for the contract. But in terms of players coming up, I think Nick Ritchie has a very strong chance. However, Bob Murray, there was an article that came out, I believe it was 2 days ago, where he was quoted as saying that he plans to let both Nick Ritchie and Shea Theodore develop before bringing them up on a full-time basis. So I think we'll probably see him at some point this season when the Ducks have some injury issues. But he's going to most likely start the season in San Diego and remain there for most, if not the entire season.
Yeah, I heard the same report as well. And Eddie, what do you think as far as if the Ducks bring up somebody, or who would they put in? If Beleskey is not able to have a deal done.
Well, you look in the playoffs and how many forwards that we had sitting that were capable of playing, and I think if Beleskey goes out, you can easily swap in, Etem, and like Thomas said, maybe if you can sign Fleischman to a similar deal that Heatley signed in the offseason last year, and bring him back for a 1 year, 2 million, where it doesn't really affect the cap considering he's UFA at the end of the season, and with Ritchie and Theodore, I think it's smart to let them develop. There's no rush to bring these guys up into the lineup, that early and throw them in. I have no doubt that Ritchie was going to succeed in the NHL, but I think it's smart to, take the Detroit approach almost and let him sit in the minors for a season or two and just develop his game even more so he's ready to play on the top line when he comes to the NHL.
Yeah, it makes sense. That's what Murray was talking about. It's not rushing, Theodore or Ritchie. And looking forward to the draft coming up here in the summer. How does it look for us, Thomas, in terms of what picks we have and the top prospects, and basically what the Duck strategy should be?
All right, so the Ducks currently hold the 27th overall pick in the first round. They do not have a pick in the second round. They have 2 picks in the third, nothing in the fourth, 1 in the fifth, 1 in the sixth, and no picks at all in the seventh. So this draft, they're calling it the McEichel draft because of Jack Eichel and Connor McDavid. They're 2 supposed franchise saviors, and they're going to go to Edmonton, Buffalo, obviously, since those 2 teams desperately need that kind of talent.
Exactly.
But a lot of people have been comparing this to the 2003 draft, which many call the greatest draft of all time. It's certainly one of the best drafts. We got Perry and Getzlaw, and Patrice Bergeron was a second-round pick that year. It was just an amazing draft, and the fact that people are comparing to that makes me very excited because even though we have a 27th pick, we got Perry at, was it 28th or 29th overall that year? So if we can get a similar type player in the 27th spot, that would be absolutely fantastic.
And what do you think the strategy is? Do you think that we try to get another forward? We try to get a center, a defenseman? Or what do you think the priority is for the Ducks?
So the Ducks, their draft staff has been on record of saying they will always draft the best available talent, especially in the first couple of rounds, and I completely agree with that. However, now that Rickard Rakell is a full-time NHL player and William Karlsson was traded at the deadline, the Ducks' center depth in terms of prospects are very low. The 2 best prospects at center are probably Chris Wagner and Michael Scarbosa, who we got from Matt Clark at the deadline. So with that in mind, the Ducks' center depth has taken a hit, so I expect them to take at least 1 or 2 centers with their picks. And it wouldn't surprise me if that wasn't the first round, but could be in the third or fifth round as well.
And then going back to kind of what we talked about earlier, if we keep Beauchemin and Beleskey walks, then do you think the Ducks would kind of look more towards wingers and whatnot for other picks since we go forward with 7 defensemen in the next season?
It very well could be an option, although the Ducks do have a ton of young wingers in their system. Stefan Nason, Nick Sorensen, Nick Ritchie, Nick Cordelis, Max Freeberg, Kevin Roy. So they've got a lot of young wingers, so I don't think that would be a priority, although if with that 27th pick, if the best player available is a winger, I fully expect them to take a winger in that position.
And then of those prospects that you've talked about, do you think, and I mean, we talked about Ritchie already, but any of the other ones, do you think any of them maybe crack the team, full time, or maybe for, injury replacement in the next season?
Last season, we saw both Stefan Mason and Max Freeberg make their NHL debuts, but they only played 1 game. I'd expect to see both of them this season, and also I think Nick Cordelis, the other SoCal boy on the prospect system, will probably make his NHL debut as well this season. I think those 3 have an excellent chance of making some noise at training camp, and if one of them is good enough, starting the season in Anaheim.
And is there any of them that you're like the most excited to see? I mean, I know you're doing all the prospect articles again this summer. Already had you publish the Raquel one so far. Obviously, it's him being graduated, as you just stated. That now he's full time on the team. But is there any of the players, one or two or three, that you would really either just because the team needs them or because you would want to see them playing at the NHL level?
For me personally, it probably would be Nick Cordelis, just because I always think it's so cool to have a California boy in the roster. It's one of the reasons why when we first drafted Emerson Etem back in 2010, I was so excited about him. And so I just love seeing the impact the Ducks and the Kings have had in Southern California, having enough players for that region on the team. Outside of him, I would really like to see Max Freeberg. Everything I've read about him makes him sound a lot like Andrew Cogliano, who's a speedy little guy who's hard on the puck, doesn't give up, and I just love watching that kind of player on the ice.
Yeah, and then I mean, if you had another person like Cogliano on the ice, I mean, could you imagine having two of them, and if they were centered by say Ryan Kessler on the second line, or paired up even with Silverberg and one of them as well on the second or third line?
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a big issue for the Ducks too. Is speed? That was kind of a little bit of a killer there towards the end of the Blackhawks series. So I think speed might be one of the attributes that the Ducks look for in this upcoming draft, Thomas.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of good skaters in this draft. One of them, Oliver Killington, he's a defenseman who at the start of the season was considered a top 10 pick, but since then his stock has fallen the most of anyone. And Bob McKenzie, his draft, he has him Killington listed at 24 overall, but some scouts have him going as late as the second round. And he's apparently just a great skating defenseman, and we know how much Murray loves that type of defenseman, drafting both Lindholm and Fowler recently. So I could see Murray picking him up at 27th if he's still available.
Are there any other prospects, out there that you look at in this draft as ones that you mentioned that one? Is there any others that you would think that the Ducks could try to go after maybe in the later rounds, and maybe sneak out another quality pick, later on in the third or fifth, sixth rounds?
It's hard to speak to the later rounds just because most of the research I do is on mock drafts and just draft rankings, and usually those don't go past the third round. So for the later rounds, I really can't say. But for around the 27th pick, there's a lot of talent that's going to be still available. The ones that stuck out to me as being most likely still there are Jake DeBrusk, Jansen Harkins, Travis Konechny, I think is how you say his name, and Brock Boser. Those four players all stood out to me. So DeBrusk, he's left wing, and in his second season in the WHL, he led his team in scoring. And he had 42 goals and 39 assists in 72 games. So that could be that top line left winger the Ducks are looking for, especially if Beleskey leaves. Jansen Harkins, he's a center. Also in his second WHL season, led his team in scoring, but he's a playmaker. In 70 games, he had 59 assists. So he knows how to pass the puck. So he could be similar to Getzlaf in that regard. So put him with Silfverberg, put him with Palmieri, just put him with someone who knows how to put the puck in the back of the net, and he can just rack up those assists. Travis Konechny is another center. He hasn't put up as many points as the other players, but he's just a good two-way center who was the captain of his team in his second season in the OHL. And then Brock Boser is a right winger who will be playing for the University of North Dakota next season. He has a good shot and also really plays well in the cycle, which is something that the Ducks do a lot of, obviously. So his kind of play could translate well to what the Ducks do on the ice.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of options. I mean, it might be interesting to see what happens come that 27th pick. Do you think that we talked about the Ducks, not making too many moves in the summer? Do you think that the Ducks should just ride that first pick where it's at, or do you think the Ducks should try to, trade maybe up somewhere in the draft? Maybe not even the first pick, but maybe, get one in the second round.
I wouldn't mind trying to get to a pick in the second round. I mean, they've got 2 third-rounders, so trying to package those two or maybe the third and the fifth round into the second round would certainly be ideal. I think just because there is so much talent in the first few rounds of this draft, I think getting a second-round pick would be huge for the team. but I also wouldn't give up anyone off the active roster for just a second round pick. So it depends basically what's available. If I can trade, you know, say Kyle Palmieri for a young player and a second round pick, there's a good chance I'd do it, but I wouldn't trade him straight up for a second round pick.
Yeah, and I think that's a wise decision because Palmieri's names come up, Etem's names come up too, and some of the rumors I've heard, I'm sure you've heard too. And I think you're right. I wouldn't want to trade, one of those guys just for a draft pick. I think you're right. I think you'd want to try to get multiple players out of both of those. I think that's the smart play, Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Ducks have a few players they'd be willing to trade. I think Palmieri's one. I think Etem's one. Um, I think eventually the team's going to have to make a decision between Fowler, Vatanen, and Theodore, but they're not going to make that for a few years. And of course, eventually make a decision between Anderson and Gibson. But again, they can wait a few years on that before they make a decision on who to trade.
Yeah, I think you're right. That issue may come up on the defense, but I think right now, if we keep Beauchemin, we should be good. Eddy, do you have any thoughts on the draft? Who you think that the Ducks should go after?
Yeah, there's a couple guys that obviously Thomas mentioned most of them. There's a couple more centers that are could be available on the pick. Joel Eriksson plays in the Swedish Elite League, is a pretty big center as well, and he's playing in the Swedish Elite League already. Obviously the Ducks have liked to bring in a lot of Swedish players over the years as well, and Colin White played on the U.S. Under-18 team with Jack Eichel and Noah Hannafin, so he's got some experience with some of the top picks in the draft as well. And a big Russian center named Alexander Durkachev plays for SKA St. Petersburg, and in the KHL he's a 6'4", 200-pound center. So he's another guy you can bring in, and in the mold of Ryan Getzlaf, and replenish some of that center depth that we've lost with Raquel graduating.
And what do you think about Thomas started talking about trying to trade up in the draft? Do you think that's something the Ducks may try to do, or you think we just kind of hold with the picks that we have?
Yeah, well, if you can get a good trade where you're not, like you said, not trading anybody from the current lineup, and not really messing up the chemistry that we have, then I think it's worth it. Maybe packaging one of those thirds with something else for a second, or somebody who's willing to move a second. But I don't see us moving any of the guys that we had playing this so far in this season and in the playoffs. I don't think it's worth it just to move them for a second round pick.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the feeling. I think we're going to not really see a whole lot this summer as much, maybe as some people had thought. I think that the team isn't really missing too much. I mean, we were almost there one game. I don't really see maybe backfilling on the center spot, as Thomas mentioned. But is there any weakness to the team that you see, Thomas, that maybe the Ducks should go after as far as, down the road in the playoffs? Either getting a defenseman or forward or anything like that?
I think the two areas where the Ducks are weakest are a true number one defenseman and a top left wing scorer. In change of a number one defenseman, there are none available in free agency. They're almost impossible to trade for. We were incredibly lucky to get Scotty in free agency and Pronger in a trade a year later. Our best bet for that type of player is to let our young defense mature and grow and hope one of them turn into that. Personally, I think Hampus Lindholm has the best chance of being that number one type defenseman. He's still only 21 and has just become such a great player in the last 2 years in the AHL. And I think for him, the sky is the limit. So in terms of defense, I think it's better just to wait and be patient. The top line left winger is something that we probably don't have in our system. So you would have to try and either trade for that or sign someone. Although I don't think there's any free agents that fit the bill in terms of that, unfortunately. So then you have to look for the trade route, who's available, and what would be willing to give up.
And what do you think, Eddy? You think it's the same thing, the top defenseman and top line left wing that are kind of the holes for the Ducks right now going into the next season?
Yeah, I mean, not much to really add on that other than you can't really find these guys other than through the draft or like you said, trying to find a Niedermayer's Pronger situation is almost impossible, especially nowadays as well. And Lindholm has the best shot at getting that chance, and if he continues to improve and mature over the next few seasons, that's definitely his job to lose. And Vatanen's going to improve, and Theodore's eventually going to crack the lineup as well. And And then Ritchie, I think if anybody has the best chance at becoming a first line left winger, although I think he's probably is more suited for a second line. But if you put anybody with Perry and Getzlaf, they're going to do well. Penner, Maroon, Beleskey, they all do well on that top line. And if you put a big guy like Ritchie on that top line, he could be the guy that in the next few seasons is finally closes the door on that top line left wing.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I agree with both of you, and we're just going to have to try to go through the draft, see what happens, and then go with the prospects. I think the only real other big issue going for next season, Thomas, is if it's going to be Anderson or Gibson in net. Anderson did so well, especially down the stretch, and then the last final games he didn't do as well. What is your take on the goalie situation for the Ducks?
I think let him battle it out. This past season, I thought it would be best just to let Anderson be the starter and Gibson be in the minors, and that kind of sort of happened because of Gibson's injuries. But next season, I think let them both just battle it out. I thought Anderson was great in the playoffs for the first 2.5 rounds, and I just think late in the series against Chicago, I think he just got tired from all the games played, from all the minutes played, because of all the overtimes. He's never played as much in his entire career, so I think it was a great learning experience for him, just as the playoffs were last year for him as well. So I think he's going to take that and know what to do next season and be even better, I'm hoping. But we all know Gibson has that incredible potential in him to be that amazing goalie as we saw last year against LA for a couple of games. So I say let them battle it out. Give each, between 30 and 50 games, depending upon how the season plays out. And then whoever's better to come playoffs, that's your starter next year.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Thomas. What do you think, Eddie? You think the same thing? Let them go back and forth and see whoever emerges as the stronger of the two?
Yeah, I think that's the best bet. And all the rumors saying that we should trade Gibson and try and pick up a higher pick, or trade him to a team like Edmonton. At this point, I don't see why. You don't see Tampa Bay looking to trade Vasilevsky when they've got Bishop. It's kind of the same situation that we have here. Is Anderson is our starter and been mostly our starter through the playoffs and in the regular season, but Gibson, just like Vasilevsky, has a chance to eventually become the better goalie and become an elite goalie in the league. So I think you just run both of them next year, and you kind of see where you sit in next off season when you got to re-sign both of them.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's going to be kind of the status for the team going forward. I don't see a lot of movement going on. I think if the Ducks are going to do anything, it may come down to the trade deadline next season, Thomas, as far as if we try to make a big move. And even then, I think if the Ducks make moves next trade deadline, I don't think it's going to be the 4 or 5 moves that we saw this last time. I mean, granted, I don't know how the season's going to go, but I think if we do anything big, it might not be till mid-season.
I agree. I think this is going to be a relatively quiet summer for the Ducks, and the best bet is to try and just re-sign the talent they have and let the young players keep getting better. Hopefully keep one of Beleskey and Beauchemin, if not both. Uh, if one walks, then maybe you look at trying to make a trade to refill the hole that you've just left. But other than that, I don't think there will be much until the deadline, if then. I think next summer will be a lot more busy because of all the free agents the Ducks will have to sign, and they may have to make some tough decisions at that point. But for now, I think it's going to be just standing pat and letting this young team get better.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if a big move comes, it'll be later in the season, like you said, unless there's some kind of a hole we need to fill. And next summer is going to be definitely action-packed with the RFAs. And how many restricted free agents and who are they that we're looking at, come 2016?
Oh, how many? That's a lot. Okay, so at forward next year, we have Kyle Palmieri, Yuri Sikac, Ricard Raquel. And for unrestricted free agents, it's Ryan Kessler and Tim Jackman. Defense, though, is where it gets expensive. We've got Sami Vatanen, Simone Dupré, and Hampus Lindholm all up for restricted free agents. And then, of course, net both Anderson and Gibson will be restricted free agents. So total, we've got 8 restricted free agents and 2 unrestricted free agents.
Yeah, that sounds like it's gonna be a really busy summer coming next season. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens. Eddie, what do you think as far as the season 2? You think it's gonna be pretty mellow maybe until the trade deadline if anything happens?
Yeah, I think that's their best bet. You really want to keep this core together and just get them to grow together as a team And you look at the championship teams; they've all grown together over multiple seasons. They've gone from rookies and just bonded together. And I think that's the best thing you can do. Let the young players improve and let the leaders grow in the locker room, and just everybody gel together. And if you have to make a move at the deadline, I think that's the best time to make it. If not next year in the off season.
And the one other thing that has come up too this last week has kind of been the assistant, the captain situation and whatnot. Is there any change that you would see? A lot of people have said that Kessler should be wearing the A. What do you think, Thomas? Do you think they'll rotate anybody around, especially if Beauchemin's not back?
I could see Kessler wearing the A. Personally, I've always kind of wanted to see Cogliano wear an A as well. I thought just because of how he just always gives it his all, leaves it on the ice, and then never misses a game, is a great type of leader to have on the ice. But if Beauchemin leaves, I almost feel like we should have one of our young defensemen take over the A. So maybe Fowler because of that young core he's been around the longest, or Lindholm because of his just amazing potential. Because I think it's good to have a leader on that back end, and if we try and grow one of them into that leadership role, I think that would be great for their development.
Yeah, I agree. And Eddie, what do you think as far as alternate captains? Do you think that there's anybody that would be deserving of it? Kessler's name has been mentioned up in there. Anybody else that you would see, maybe like Thomas said, Cogliano or some of the others?
Yeah, I definitely think Kessler and Cogliano are deserving of an A, but if Beauchemin leaves, I think it's better to give it to a defenseman. Like Thomas said, you want to have a leader on the blue line, and I don't really think we should strip the A away from Perry and give it to Kessler or Cogliano, even if they do deserve it. I think, for forwards with Getzlaf as captain and Perry as A, I think that's suitable for right now. I think the only change should be made is if Beauchemin doesn't come back, then maybe give it to Fowler or Lindholm.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's just been interesting this last week or so because once the Ducks lost, of course, there's all kinds of noise on social media and the internet about things going down. I just put out an article late last night talking about in detail what happened to the season, so everybody can go read that. It looks at everything. A lot of people are trying to isolate what happened down the stretch, and I'm not going to rehash it here on the podcast. You can go read it, but I talk about a lot of the things that went wrong and some of the things that went well and what the Ducks can do. But in the summertime, we're going to keep going with the podcasts. We're going to try to get one in the next couple of weeks. We'll have Thomas back on, hopefully, and a bunch of the other writers, and kind of maybe do an end of the year wrap up, talking about all the teams. And the website's going to be redone and much better, more professional in the next couple of weeks coming up. And we'll keep updating everybody when more information comes on. And thanks for coming on, Thomas. And look forward to all your great articles on the prospects. I'm glad to have you on here and appreciate all your knowledge and research.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
And Eddie, I know your name sometimes gets escaped by other people on other podcasts. Maybe I did a show, another one earlier this week, talking about the Game 7 meltdown. But I meant to correct it on that show. But I appreciate everything you do as well, Eddie, for coming up with this and putting the time into this. A lot of people don't realize that this isn't always that easy. We put a lot of work into the show.
Yeah, no problem. I'm sure that guy didn't mean too much by forgetting my name. Hopefully he remembers it now for next time you go on.
Yeah, hopefully. Or I'll bring you on there and be like, hey, this is Eddie, okay? But yeah, I mean, we're gonna go forward, folks. In the summer, we'll have podcasts. I'm not sure if we'll have them every single week, but we'll definitely have them. Keep everybody updated. Have more and more articles on everything that's going on, whatever other news we hear. Like we said, it may be pretty mellow for the next couple months, but we'll have updates on the draft, and September's not far away. We're working on more shirts too as well, and we'll just keep it rolling. And we appreciate everybody for following us and listening to us, and see you here in another week.